So we'll explore the divide between lagers and ales. We'll look at Dr. Milegard's flavor wheel, and I can't remember if I've ever had that, but that's why I use Untapped. I'm Nikolai Williams, and this is Don't Worry, Beer Happy. Lagers, ales, and flavors, oh my. So I'm joined here today with a good friend of mine, Daniel Cohen. You can find him on Twitter over there at It's Daniel Cohen. I guess for this podcast, I'd like to call him the lead designer for most of the, visual elements. He's a genie. I don't know how he does it. You ask for something and he figures it out. But I don't know if you want to say anything
Thank you.
about yourself.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. I'm honored to be the first guest on the first ever episode of Don't
Yeah,
Worry, Be Happy. This has
it'll go down in
been
the
a
history
long
books.
time coming.
It,
It
it,
will, yeah.
yeah, it really has.
I mean, when was when was the first time you had this thought to start this? I feel like we've been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know. It probably whenever I started studying a little bit for Cicerone program things, I just thought it was interesting and cool to do. And there's nothing really out there that I found that was as fun as I'm hoping this will be and as educational as I hope it'll be. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that's a lot of your expert cicerones who are explaining things at a very high level where most people are kind of just, I don't really care about that. And so I kind of wanted something to be a little more fun, a little more flexible. But yeah, that's kind of what I say.
How far did you get in your Cicerone training? Where did you leave off?
Yeah, so I'm not a certified Cicerone currently, but I do have a certified beer server certification, so that's the level 1. And then I have a couple of, I don't even really know what to call them, but they're it's I don't know. It's kind of like just a specialty, I guess. It's like a German specialty I have, I think, and then an English specialty. So that's kind of just taking a exam over those styles and answering some questions about the history and stuff like that. I mean, it's nothing too in depth or too hard to do, but there's no tasting involved in those. Whereas the thing with the Cicerone, the reason I haven't taken is I just don't feel like I'm there at being able to notice all these flavors. And and funny enough, that is one of the topics tonight is the flavor wheel. So we'll get to delve into that a bit.
Is that like the ultimate Cicerone test? Like, do you have to go to a location and try different things and be able to describe them? Is that how it goes?
Yeah, so the Cicerone program, so there are 4 different levels actually. The first is what I have, the certified beer server, and a lot of restaurants might have this just for their waiters, waitresses, whatever, just so that they can kind of have an understanding and be able to describe things to the clients and the customers who are in there, because a lot of times people might say, I don't really know what I want. Can you recommend something? And if you've never really had training or you don't drink anything, then it's kind of hard to recommend. But yeah, the second level is the certified Cicerone. So whenever you think about the certified Cicerone, it's not as high as you might think, right? It's only 2 out of 4. And you do have to go take an in-person part. Since COVID, you can take part of it online, I think. And so that's a written test, kind of history and styles, and you might have to know specifically ABVs and IBUs, so the alcohol content, how bitter things are. But then, yeah, there is a component where you need to go on site, which they have them at a lot of different sites in the U.S., and they schedule them well in advance, so you can say, oh, well, I'll be in whatever city at this time, so I'll just go ahead and take my test then. After that, though, there's advanced Cicerone and then a master Cicerone. And then they just get progressively harder. I mean, you have to add stuff in like pairings and discernible bad flavors. You have to be very precise. You have to be able to plan out oh, I have this beer. Here's the food that would go really well with that. And you have to talk with current master cicerones and the directors of the programs while you're there to have them judge you, basically. And I think there's only maybe now 19, 20 master cicerones in the world. So I mean, it's
wow, really?
It's a very select field of.
It's very exclusive.
Yeah.
You'll get there though.
I mean, maybe. I don't know about that, but we'll see. I mean,
the bad flavor tasting is an interesting concept. have you done any? I know you haven't ascended the ranks, but have you done any like looking for bad flavor? It just sounds like a very unpleasant thing to have to deal with or get tested on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have not really done too much in terms of bad flavors. I mean, I try to pick them out when I can. It's a lot easier whenever you have like an old beer or something that's been sitting in
Right.
direct sunlight because you can taste skunking of a beer, right? You know,
Yeah, but you don't want that.
right. You don't want it.
You don't want a beer that's been sitting out, but you just have to be able to diagnose it basically or recognize what the badness is.
Yeah, like there could be a lot of different things, and this is actually a episode topic that I would like to have is talking about a lot of the different bad flavors, and they'll be on the flavor wheel too, so you can see some of them. But it could be anything from like a vinegary taste to metallic taste, or just plain like bad food taste that you already know from just normal food and drinks. And it can come from anything like the machinery hasn't been cleaned or the tap line hasn't been cleaned. Especially if it hasn't been cleaned in a long time, it has bacteria. You can get a lot of bacterial infection of it. You can get
What's your pitch for the guest that you're gonna have on Bad Taste episode?
well,
How
there's
are you gonna sell them on it?
well, I think it's a kind of fun experiment. I know the Cicerone program sells kits. I think there are like 6, and there are some other ones on the internet where you can do a lot more bad flavors, or really other flavors just in general. They don't have to all be bad, but you would basically take like a American light lager or something. You'd have that as your control, and then you would use that same beer in like 1 or 2 ounce tastes, like in however many different flavors you have. And so you'd say, okay, this is the control I have, and this one should taste metallic. This is the control I have. This one should taste like it has, like that buttery popcorn kind of flavor. Yeah, like there are a ton of different things that could be wrong with it, but I just think it's an interesting thing. So I don't know, maybe we have a panel of people and we see who can determine what's what. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess if it's like a controlled way that they're causing the beers to taste bad, rather than like instructing you to leave this beer sitting out, in direct sunlight for
Right.
12 hours and then
Right.
try it and tell us what's wrong with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that. I mean, we could do that. I mean, skunking is easy, right? I mean, it's in as little as a couple minutes you could have it skunked, and a lot of beers like I don't know Corona, Heineken, stuff like that do have some skunking because of the clear and green bottles. The bottles don't protect it against all the sunlight. I mean, the general rule is if it's clear, it's 0%. If it's green, then it's like 20 to 30%. Then if it's brown, you might have up to 98%, but still not full protection. And that's one thing that cans kind of help us with is there's less oxidation, there's less sunlight.
So cans are better to avoid skunking at least. Are
Yeah.
there benefits of bottles?
I don't know that there's necessarily benefits. I mean, I think it's just whatever the brewer wants it to be. I mean, they could be easy open bottles, right?
Sure.
Maybe that would be a benefit, but it's tradition. I think, we've always done it this way,
Yeah.
so that's the way we're going to continue to do it.
Yeah, and of course there's some, marketing product element to it. Like not every brewery is gonna want to put their beers in cans versus bottles. It's a whole presentation thing.
Right, and I think the cans really come from America. I mean, we use cans heavily. It's better for the environment, I think, because it's easier to recycle the aluminum, and it seems more cool. More modern, more craft beery when you have that kind of idea in your head.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So let's see here. So we have some chat going on. Corona skunked too. Yeah, I mean, I think Corona is skunked sometimes. I mean, it's not intentionally skunked, I don't think, but it's just the fact that it sits on a shelf and any sunlight can kind of cause.
But Corona's not. That's not a green bottle. That's a clear bottle.
It's a clear bottle, yeah. So there's no protection from sunlight. So if you take a Corona onto the beach, you just leave it out there, boom, it's gonna be skunked pretty quickly.
Yeah. I guess that's the other benefit of having cans on the beach, because obviously you don't want broken glass or glass in general on the beach, but the skunking element.
Yeah,
That's important.
for the life of me, I can't get some people to care about the sunlight. You know, I've gone to a lot of breweries. I'm like, all right, can you put the taster like in the shade at least? Like, you know, put it in front of your body so you cast a shadow, because it just hurts me thinking it might get skunked. And they're like, it's fine. Like, you can't even taste it. I'm like, oh, if it gets skunked, you're gonna taste it, because I don't know.
Like, it takes sufficient time for it to get skunked, right? At least a few minutes.
I mean, it starts whenever it hits the sunlight hits the beer, right? But to get to the levels that you need, I don't know exactly what they are, but I'm pretty sure it's still a small amount. It's like parts per trillion. And as soon as it hits that level, that threshold that you can taste, then you can just taste it. And you can't get it out. It's not gonna go away.
Trying to think if I've ever had like an obviously skunked beer. I probably have, but I don't know if I've noticed.
Yeah.
But I guess we're about to learn more about flavors and.
Yeah, we are gonna learn more about flavors. I think before we pour our first one, we have let's see, how long do your tasters last that you let them skunk? I mean, mine don't skunk because I keep them protected, but you know, you don't have to shoot them down. That's not the necessary action after you have a flight of beers. Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of remember that beer school at Cicero's that we went to where we had the fat tire, but I didn't think it was skunked. I thought it was fat tire that was really old and then normal fat tire. That's what I thought.
Yeah, there was something with like intentionally giving us an old beer. Also don't remember them intentionally skunking a beer.
Right.
Do you think that's like, if it's an intentionally old beer, is that probably going to taste better than a skunked beer? They're probably both, they have some badness to both of the tastes, but like, would you prefer a very
Yeah,
old beer versus a skunked beer?
I would definitely prefer it because you might get some breakdown in the flavors. And I guess it depends on what it's made of. You know, if you have a beer with a lot of hops, that's going to break down really quickly, right? You're not going to have the same boldness, the same bitterness, the same flavors. It's going to just taste not like it should. So that might be, you know, kind of worse. But if you have, well, I mean, also something with a lot of hops in the sun, you're going to have a lot harsher skunking too, because it's the acids in the hop that cause the skunking.
Oh.
Whereas, you know, if you have an old beer, it might taste a little cardboardy potentially. It might taste just kind of stale. You know, you just have that innate sense of, oh, this is kind of stale. And
yeah, but drinkable, more drinkable than the skunk.
I would think so.
It just sounds terrible.
Right. I mean,
it's a very crude name for what happens to it.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine a skunk, and you know, like what you're drinking tastes like that smells. It's definitely not pleasant.
I don't want that.
Yeah. So yeah, you thought skunked was gone bad. We see that in the chat there. Yeah, skunked is definitely not just gone bad. I mean, it could go bad in a lot of ways, bacterial infection, other things. But yeah, the skunking is from the sunlight interacting with I believe it's alpha acids in the hops. So
it skunked and it went bad. If it was an old beer that was also sitting out in the sunlight,
you probably shouldn't drink it. Yeah, I mean, you could look at it that way, and if you choose to, then you have a very happy, positive outlook on life. But I would not want that kind of beer. So. Sonner, do you wanna pour our first beer here? Maybe
I do. Instruct me on pouring.
Okay, so yeah, so first we're gonna go with an American. I think it's just a lager, so I don't think it's a light lager even. But we're going with a Miller High Life here. So I don't know if I know this is one of your favorite beers. You have the tall boy can.
Of beers. It's not just my favorite. It's the champagne.
It is the champagne of beers, and you know that's one thing I wanted to ask you about is, you know, we look at the packaging of this, right? You know, we see this glass. You know, does this give you
a? I don't have that on mine.
Oh, you don't have this on yours. Wow.
No, because mine's taller than normal.
But do these colors and like, does this picture make you feel like this is kind of upscale? You know, it's like a fancy, classy beer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something overall like classic and simplistic to the look. Like it's not too detailed, you know, it's not like an over the top design. It's very, very simple. I think, you know, simple and like elegant often go together, and champagne is probably like, you know, along those same lines. to me, I always feel like the most excited or the most like this is champagne when I'm drinking it out of a bottle, because I just feel like the bottle ups the overall classiness of it. I think generally like they keep their bottle and can designs very simple, very clean. So like that is probably what they're going for, just like a clean, classic look. Uh, and yeah, I think champagne it resonates with that.
Yeah, I agree. Like it makes me feel like it is. Although when you drink it, I don't.
Well, your taste buds tell you something else, but you drink with your eyes before you drink with your taste buds.
That's true. I mean, it'll definitely push sales. It'll definitely push sales.
There you
So
go. That's what it's all about.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, I can go ahead and show us how to pour it here. I'm going to open it up. I think the glass I'm going to use. So I have freshly rinsed glasses. Now, these aren't beer clean glasses, but they are clean glasses.
Oh, you're not using a beer clean glass for your first ever Don't Worry Beer Happy podcast?
Look, I mean, it takes more work than just washing it, right? Like, it's not as simple as that.
I know that. Yeah, I thought, okay. I thought it'd be worth the effort for this first one, but it's fine. Mine's also probably not beer clean, but I wasn't expecting mine to be.
Yeah, it's fine. It doesn't necessarily matter. And before we continue here, let's see. So Dan, you seem to be quiet. Apparently, let me turn you up a bit.
Up.
So,
is that better?
Let's
Don't
see.
It's better.
And I'm gonna turn you down in my ear now.
Okay.
Yeah, is he?
Do I sound better? I could turn up my mic, maybe? There's like a little volume thing on my mic, but if you can control it all, I think.
Yeah, okay, he said much better. Okay, so.
Much better. Great.
So here we go.
Was I backing up before?
I don't know. I mean, I was just.
I've been pretty stationary.
I was just chit-chatting. I didn't really, see whether or not you're backing up. So.
No.
I'm using a Civil Life glass here, and this is from St. Louis. St. Louis Mo, so throw back to those days. But
Born and raised,
for this beer, something like that. I mean, not exactly,
but
for this beer, I don't know that this matters as much. But a lot of other beers, it might. And what you want to do, whenever you have your glass, you have your beer, and you're gonna pour it. A lot of people might just pour it directly in because you have a bottle of juice or something, and you just pour it in. But you don't want to do that because it'll rustle it up. You'll get a lot of foaming and fizzing. Now, I will say your High Life will probably look better than mine because this one actually is decently old. So, we'll see how it goes.
How old? How old is decently? Do you know? You might have no idea.
No, I do know. It was back whenever I was visited over summer. So,
oh yeah, Nashville visit.
Yeah. So this is definitely pretty old. But we're gonna go with it, and I mean, within 6 months, I mean, I'm usually okay drinking stuff. So
yeah, I was gonna say, like, do you feel like there's a certain time where if you're like, if this is older than this many months old, then is it 6 months?
Ideally,
like threshold.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the threshold of like I probably don't want to drink it no matter what it is. I mean, once you're in 2 or 3 months, it's probably not going to be as good as it should be. I mean, 4 and 5, you're kind of looking at like, I don't know if I really want to. And by 6, it's like, okay, I probably shouldn't drink it. It's just not going to be that good.
Okay.
I mean, you can definitely drink it.
This is all within 6 months. Your highlight.
Yeah.
So you'll get a mostly accurate read.
I think so. I think it'll be good. So, I mean, so the way you want to pour it, right? You don't want to pour it directly in. I mean, you want to have your glass at an angle, usually 45 degrees is what they tell you. And then, you're just going to start pouring, right? And then once you get kind of 2/3 of the way or more, you're going to start tilting your glass kind of back up to the top and then finishing your pour. Now, I do have a big head on this, and that's probably because whenever I opened it, I already saw foam in it. But once you have this, you can see that there's a head here. Usually, yeah, I mean, yours looks...
I think I nailed mine.
Yours looks really good.
Great.
Usually you want 1/2 inch to 1 inch of head. I mean, this is probably more like 1.5 inches, which isn't as great, but
a little heavy.
Yeah, it's a little heavy. I don't know if you can see it, but it almost looks like the background screen. You can see the bubbles kind of going.
You're right.
Through there, so I think that's pretty cool. I think we nailed it on that one, but
yeah.
the thing about beer clean is if you look at your glass, you know, you can see bubbles that are moving, and then you can also see bubbles that aren't moving. And the ones that aren't moving are the ones that are clung to something, right? It could be residue from soap. It could be, you know, a speck of dust that you can't see and you would never know was there, right? But it's not beer clean. And that's why a lot of times if you go to a brewery or something, they'll take your glass and they'll push it against that like water shooter, you know. I don't know if you've seen stuff like that, but you press it down,
Yeah.
it shoots water, and that kind of just does a final rinse before they fill it up. So
But that's not gonna really do it. Like that's not gonna clean a glass. Just rinsing it with water, right?
no, I mean the proper way to clean it actually. I mean you're gonna have the glass, and there's usually like a 3-part wash that they do. You know, so there's one that's like rinsing it out, and then there's one that actually has some sort of like cleaner. It's not usually your normal dish soap because that can leave residues. There are special things that they would buy to make sure their glasses get completely clean. And once they dip it in that and let it sit in there for, I don't know, 15 seconds or whatever it is the dishwashers do, I'm not exactly sure how long they specify, but they put it in the rinse formula and then they let it dry out. And then once they're ready to serve it, that's when they do the water and it just does a final rinse. So.
Got it. And again, the key to knowing if your glass is beer clean or not is if you see bubbles sticking anywhere, right?
I mean,
Like in theory, a beer clean glass has all the bubbles rising up.
correct.
Right?
Yeah. So you'll have that. I mean, another thing with beer clean is obviously there's not like lipstick marks or other lip marks. There's not.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. That would not be clean.
Yeah, I mean, not only is it not beer clean, it's not clean, right?
It's not clean, right?
And so that's the difference, right? You have a demarcation of, okay, this is a clean glass. It has been washed, and this is not a beer clean glass. You know, it's been washed, but it's not perfect, right? And for your home consumption, it's probably not going to matter. But if you're looking at working in a place that serves beer, or you want to become a brewer or something, you're going to want your beers to be served in stuff that provides it the best look, the best, you know, taste, the best aroma. So you're not going to want places serving your beer, you know, you're proud of it and they serve it in this crap glass that it isn't beer clean, whenever they could just go one step further and get you a beer clean glass. So I think
Good.
I'm going to introduce.
Can you drink it?
Yeah, I mean, you can go ahead and drink it. I'm going to pull up,
All
you know, one thing for us today. And so this is the flavor wheel that we're going to be going off of. Now, I just found this one online, and you can probably find this online in other forms. I mean, there's going to be a lot of different ones and a lot of variations, but they're all more or less the same, and they are evolving as we kind of go through time. I mean, at this point with the flavor wheel, they're trying to add a bunch of stuff, and I think you see how many flavors are on there, right?
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is overwhelming.
For me, at least.
And I think it is overwhelming for a lot of people, and there's a lot of talk about, should we just take this flavor wheel and make it a bunch of different flavor wheels, right? So you have maybe this main beer flavor wheel of categories, but then there's a sub flavor wheel of like, okay, only these flavors are going to be on this wheel. So there's an argument to be made, I think, but I don't know. We're going to try to work with it today and see what we can do. I'm assuming.
I'm so intimidated, especially because I've never once thought about like, what does this domestic lager taste like? Like I've never thought, what am I actually tasting when I've had a High Life? Like it just tastes like High Life to me. I wouldn't describe it any other way.
Right.
So you know, there's like other beers, you know, you'll get like certain fruit, you know, flavors or more hoppiness, but to me, this is just like the base level of beer taste. So I'm curious how you would describe this using the flavor wheel.
I mean, it's going to be difficult, I think, right? And this is the thing. And this is why I don't drink these beers all that much, because it's hard. It's made to be a clean, inoffensive thing, right? That people can just drink. There's no mind paid to like, okay, we really want this flavor, this flavor, this flavor, and this flavor, and I want this showing through underneath, and I want, you know, it's just made to be a simple, clean beer that you can just sit back and drink. So I don't know, do you want to have a little sip and just give your first opinions? You don't have to use a flavor wheel yet, but just kind of say your thoughts.
Also, before I give my thoughts, I know with wine, you're supposed to like smell it and then like swish it around, then maybe like swish it in your mouth or something. Is there a certain way to taste beer correctly that you know of?
There are kind of suggestions, I think, that
I mean,
may.
it's too late now. I've taken 2 sips, but yeah, I'm
r-
curious.
Right. I mean, yeah. What you should do if you want to be completely accurate is some combination of, you want to look at it, maybe get like a wafting kind of smell, you know.
Mm,
Whenever you get close to it, you might want to smell kind of what's coming out of the glass. I don't know, they call it retronasal maybe. You can kind of taste just through the smell of it, and
mm,
tasting stuff is very
okay,
much what you smell, right? And so
sure.
it can change based on your glass even, whenever you're drinking it. So if you have a glass that doesn't let the aromas, especially in beers that have a lot going on, it doesn't let them kind of show through, then it might taste different than it does somewhere else. That's why if you drink out of a can versus something that you pour, you might get a different flavor. So
Hmm. So back to what I taste. I am looking at the flavor wheel, and I feel like most of what I'm getting is probably in the pale category or into the caramel and crystal malt category. So like like crackers, toast, white bread, cereal, biscuit. I would not be able to differentiate between those tastes, but I feel like that's the general vibe I get from this.
mhm.
Um, there's also a crispness to it, and I don't think that's a taste. Is that a mouthfeel? Is crisp a mouthfeel? No.
Yeah, I mean they don't
Sh-
have it on here.
Uh,
But crisp is something
no.
that I would use to describe a lot of things, and I would say that like the crisp is, like when
That's
you,
not flavor, right?
it's not a flavor, but the stuff that's crisp, I think, is the stuff that doesn't kind of linger in your mouth. It cuts off. Something like
Yeah,
that.
that's fair. There is a little bit of sweetness to it,
There
I
is,
will
yeah.
say. Do you get any sweetness?
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. I was gonna say, I
Yeah.
do find the pale to be where I land with a lot of these.
Hmm.
So, but there is a sweetness to it, and I think if you go back and look at maybe, I don't know if you did this experiment in biology or something, but if you take just a plain white
Probably
cracker,
not.
yeah, well, if you take just a plain white cracker, like a saltine cracker or something, unsalted or whatever, just a plain cracker, and you let it sit in your mouth and start to break down, you will potentially start tasting some sweetness in there. And
Mm.
I don't know if
I
it's
could see that.
because, it's made out of similar things, the graininess, well, whatever. I mean, there is sugar in here. There's not sugar in here now, I guess. I mean, maybe a little bit, but there's it's made from sugar, right? Yeah, the yeast has to eat
Right.
something while it's
It
in
is
there.
interesting when you like, like when you actively think about a flavor, like when you're looking for a flavor, when you try
Hmm.
something, it sort of makes itself known more. I feel like there's got to be a name for that phenomenon. But now that I took another sip and I'm like thinking
Hmm.
sweetness, then it tastes like extra sweet.
Right, and it's
So,
there's a couple different kind of sugars on here, right? You have a honey on here. You have molasses, dried fruit, a candy. Like it's not an overpowering sweetness. It's kind of a very
yeah,
muted sweetness.
subtle.
Maybe one that you would even get from honey, because I feel like whenever you have maybe a honey straw or something, it's kind of a thin sweetness almost. Kind of
Yeah,
natural
I
tasting.
would I'd have a lot of trouble like differentiating the sweetness of honey versus molasses, for example. Like to me, honey is something you add to just to make something sweeter,
Mhm.
not to make it taste more like honey, if that makes sense.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
like it embodies sweetness, I don't think of it as honey.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking back to maybe meaderies and stuff like that where they actually use a lot of honey.
Yeah.
I know in my time in Maine, there was a meadery that I had gone to that they served their honey in sticks, and then they also obviously had their mead. But it's kind of a nice thing to be able to go and eat some honey too. It's pretty tasty just by itself. So yeah.
Mead is cool. Mead is way more like, flavor forward than beer or than Miller High Life. Like in the mead context, I think I would recognize honey, but it's because they make it a point to make it taste like that,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah, and mead itself is I don't know. I would classify it in the same vein as beer, even though it's not beer per se.
Really?
Uh,
Mm.
well, it's kind of like where else are you going to categorize it, right? I mean, beer is such a
I
large
just
thing.
but I think of it as its own thing. It's like it's not beer, it's not wine.
Right, it's a
To
little
me.
cousin, right? But I think it's
Yeah,
more beery than it is winey. I don't know. I mean, all of these
maybe.
kind of things are, and they're up to your interpretation. But wine generally is a lot stronger than beer. But there are beers that are 18%. I mean, look at Dogfish Head, they worldwide stout and 120-minute IPA, right?
Is that like record for strongest beer? Do they have it?
No, I don't think so. I don't know what the strongest beer is actually. I know I had a beer that was I think it was 18 something, um, in St.
Was
Louis
it?
actually. It was by the Schmaltz Brewing Company, I think. I don't remember what the name of it was. I could look it up on Untapped in a little bit. But I know also there's Utopia by Boston Beer Company, so that's who makes Sam Adams. And I think Utopia
Oh,
might be in the 20s or something like that. It's something quite a bit, and that bottle costs like $250 or something. So
really?
it's not one you just want to go out and buy, but it's very limited, and I think it only happens like once
Yeah,
every year or two. I'm not exactly sure.
that's cool. So I wanted to get to this. We sort of skipped over it, but the sugar you said comes from the yeast. Is that right?
Did you say the sugar comes from the yeast?
Yeah.
Well,
Is that correct?
no.
Or
So
the sugar is food for the
yeah,
yeast.
the sugar is food
What
for
is
the yeast.
what I want to get to is what is yeast poop? What is the part that's yeast poop?
I guess that is a way to put it. Yeah, I mean, so the product of yeast eating the sugar that's in beer is going to be carbonation and your alcohol. And those are the two primary things. So if you brew your own beer at home, you don't have to infuse it with carbon dioxide. It's not going to be as much, obviously, as something that is at a bar because a lot of them have separate tanks. You have a tank for the beer, you have a tank for the CO2, NO2, or whatever nitrogen's numbers are, that mixture, right? So in that mixture, they shoot that through a tube, they have the beer coming through another one, and it combines before it goes into the pour. But yeah, so if you do it at home, your yeast is just going to eat the sugars that come from the the grains that you boiled. So whenever you boil the grains, it opens up and it releases the sugars into the water, and or the wort is what it's called. But once it releases that, and then you add the yeast into it, the yeast is gonna start eating that. It's gonna start reproducing to more yeast, so you're gonna have a bunch more yeast, and then yeah, that's where you get all your alcohol and your sugars, or all your
And
and CO2, not sugar. Excuse me.
right, and hops are a grain, correct? Is malt something different?
So hops are a vine. Um,
Or plant?
it's a plant. It's a vine plant, right? It's actually the closest cousin to marijuana, surprisingly, right?
Oh, right. I heard that.
Which I think is weird. Like you don't think that they're going to be some familial relations or something there, but
But like you've had weed beers before, haven't you? Like they do. I feel like they do kind of have an inherent hoppiness to them too.
yeah, I mean, whenever the brewer goes, and to be clear, weed beers is just to say that it tastes as it might
Flavored
smell,
like that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when the brewers attempt to make it a certain flavor, I don't know that you're tasting necessarily just general hoppy flavor though, right? Because your hops could be like they are in any IPAs, where it's very juicy and fruity, and you don't really get any of that
Sure.
character showing through. Or it could be just more minimal, like this. I'm sure there's some. I don't know what hops are in here. I'm sure there's something, right? But it's not used to bitter it, and it's not used to really flavor it or make it aromatic. It's just I don't know. Because this is like, I don't know, 5 IBUs, something like that, and the scale is generally 0 to 100. I mean, you might be able to taste a little bit more than that. It's kind of unknown exactly where the palate ends up, but I mean, this is very light on that scale.
Back to wort, is it called? That's like the hot mash that the yeast eats. Is that right?
Well, so it's the concoction that you make once you boil the grains in water, right? So you
Yeah,
add,
yeah, and what are the grains that you're using in the
uh,
brewing process?
I mean, it could be like barley. It could be anything though, right? I mean, anything that's gonna produce sugar. I mean, I think technically you could make beer without using grains. You could, add a bunch of adjuncts like just, other things that contain sugar. I know in some of the American light lagers they use adjuncts like rice. I mean, honey could be used in there. I mean, anything that's gonna allow the yeast to eat, you could use it. You might not get the best result, right? And that's why they use the grains, because you can boil them. It releases a bunch of sugars into the water, and produces a pretty good result.
Okay, and malt is my last question. Where does malt come? What is malt?
I
Where
mean,
does it come from?
that's usually when people are talking about malts, they're talking about the grains that are in there. If it's very malty, I mean, you might have a lot of flavor from the grains. You might have kind of a heavier flavor that's not kind of related to bitterness and like the fruitiness of hops, and it's not related to maybe the banana flavors that you get from the yeast or whatever the character is of that yeast. I mean, the flavors can come from a lot of things in beer. You can have the water affect beer, for example. But yeah, I mean, with the malt, I mean, we're just talking the stuff that you're boiling to make the sugars to eventually feed the yeast to make your beer.
I like the malt. I think malt is my favorite beer flavor.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at our flavor wheel over here, right? I mean, you can see
Got a whole category.
right.
There's a whole quarter of it is all devoted to malt.
Right. And so you have your pale ones, which we're using in this beer, the High Life, but then you go all the way to dark, and you can have malts that are coffee, chocolate. I mean, your black patent malts are what's going to make stuff really, really dark, and that's what produces a lot of the, kind of very black color in stouts.
I'm seeing smoked meat as a flavor in the specialty grains.
Yeah,
section.
that's
You ever had a beer that tastes like smoked meat?
yeah. So there's a category actually. It's a Rausch beer, right? And that's a smoked beer. So if you ever hear anyone say Rausch beer, or you see it on a menu or something, it's gonna have a very smoky flavor. It might be kind of campfirey, might be kind of like cooked bacony. It's just that kind of feel to it.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I would like to try one of those.
Flavorless is your lager single Belgian Pilsner. Well, what does that mean? Chad is wild. I don't understand.
Chad is wild.
I don't understand this comment.
Did you say Chad is wild or chat?
I did say chat, but I guess Chad could have also worked.
I just had to make sure I didn't hear you incorrectly.
Oh, so that's your list of things that are flavorless. Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say it's flavorless, right? Like we said, there's a very distinct sugary kind of flavor.
Yeah, right. I feel like the more we've talked about it and the more I'm drinking it, that does feel like its defining characteristic almost. And I wonder if that is why I prefer it over other domestic lagers like your Bud Lights and your Natty Lights. Like to me, this has always tasted the best, and I wonder if it is just because of that extra sweetness.
One thing that I was thinking is like this is I'm pretty sure a full-bodied.
That's true. It's not a light
American
beer.
lager, right? So a lot of what you said was an American light lager, and those are even lighter than this, whether it's for caloric decrease or they just want something that's even easier to drink, right? I don't know what could be easier to drink than this. It's very simple. It's
plenty light. Yeah, it's light enough for me.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the light lagers, but apparently people like them, right? I mean, they.
Oh yeah, they're a big hit.
They have more sales than most. I'd actually be curious to see the sales of all the American light lagers versus other categories. I mean, I'm sure it dwarfs everything, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Have to imagine. I mean, they always just advertise like crazy on everything, so
right,
they're everywhere.
They are. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say about the High Life?
Just that I love it. I don't know if there's much else to say about it other than that. I think I would prefer to drink this over champagne, for example. I'd rather have the champagne of beers rather than actual champagne. It's always been my cheap beer of choice. I think you can't beat the value of Miller High Life. That would be my like close up
Now,
commercial or like that testimonial that they show, you know,
right,
several
I was gonna say
testimonials of
actually,
people.
if anyone from
You
Miller ever
can't beat
sees
the
this,
value. Yeah.
if
What they're gonna sponsor. They're the first sponsor of Don't Worry Be Happy is gonna be Miller.
if anyone from Miller's listening, you have the testimonial of maybe your number one fan. I mean,
I think so.
I
This is the
will.
first time I'm drinking a 16 ouncer, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a
Um,
16-ounce High Life.
yeah, I've only had the 12-ounce cans and the 12-ounce bottles. And yeah, I think I liked it felt like a more novel experience drinking out of the bottle. I think just because I'd only had cans before then.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
but yeah, I don't know. I do opt to pour things in a glass also more often than not. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it greatly enhances the experience. You know, it makes it a little bit more fun and less in the vein of, oh, let's just drink this because there's alcohol in it. You know, it's kind of trying to appreciate it a little bit more. So
right, but there's also something to, like the very end of a beer. I feel like whether it's can or bottle, it tastes bad, right? Like it tastes worse than the rest of it. What is that all about?
I don't know if that's a thing or
Do you
not.
not know what I'm talking about? What? No, like if
Well,
you have a can of something and you don't, the very end of it just it's like more watered down, or maybe everything sinks to the bottom in some bad way.
my guess, especially with like High Life and your light lagers and just any American lager like that, is probably because the temperature has increased on it and the flavors just get worse. Right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in
Just because
these.
it gets hotter.
Right. There's a lot of stuff in these where the reason they tell you to serve it very cold, or you know, they have the mountains that turn blue or whatever they have on the can, is so that you keep it cold, because if it's cold it's going to mute the flavors, and if you mute the flavors they don't have to put good ones in there, which you know, it's fine for what it is, right? I mean, it's not my preferred
Yeah,
thing,
I
but
mean, yeah, can confirm. Like the warm domestic lager is probably the worst drink ever invented or experienced.
right.
It's not intentionally served that way for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, we have it just guzzle those bad boys. Well, I mean, that's kind of the point, right? If you don't
That
guzzle it,
is the point.
if you don't guzzle it, then you're gonna have a warming effect, and whenever you're
Right.
in a tap at a bar or something, the temperature is going to be at 38 degrees or so, whereas most
Is
of the
that the optimal temperature?
yeah, that's what it's going to be at, is 38 degrees, and but that's for everything though, and so that's why if I go, you know, I don't want a frosted glass. I don't want to drink it immediately because I want it to warm up a bit, right? And lagers can be served colder than ales, and it's more okay because lagers, I guess, have trouble trying to develop some of those flavors that you might have in an ale. And we can get to that whenever we go to the next beer here in a minute. But the ales you're going to have can be served usually definitely above 40, right? So 40 to 45 at the coldest. And some of them, like a lot of your darker beers, you might even serve like 50, 55. It's not going to be what you're used to going to the fridge, just grabbing it and drinking it, right? I mean, 50 degrees is actually not that. I mean, it's cool, right? But it's not cold. You're not gonna.
Yeah, but what about like the actual content of the beer makes it better served at that warmer temperature for the dark ones I'm talking
Yeah, it's just the fact that the way that you taste things, it's more able to be tasted if it's warmer. When it's cold, I think,
about?
like, I don't know the exact science behind why you can't taste it as much, but the fact is you can't taste it as much. So if it's colder,
Got it.
if those warm beers, if you have like a stout that's 34 degrees, right? It's barely above freezing. You're not going to taste all the same nuanced flavors that you should be tasting if it was at 50.
I see. Right. So the darker beers tend to just have more complexity to the flavor, is that right? So they serve them a little warmer so you can get all of that?
I think that's one part of it. I mean, you can have lighter beers that are very complex too, and so
Sure. So maybe it's just like those specific flavors that stouts and porters have are better tasted. when they're warm.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah, I would think so. I think any beer that has some sort of complexity to it is going to be easier to taste whenever it's warmer. And then if there's not very much
Yeah.
complexity, or you don't want people to be tasting everything in it, well, then serve it colder. I mean,
To the just guzzle those bad boys comments, I want to say that's what a glass is good for. You don't have to just guzzle it if you pour it in a glass, because then, like I said, you don't have to deal with the bottom of it. So to me, that's the benefit of a glass. I can take my time. I don't think it's gonna get significantly warmer by the end. Especially a glass like this, where I'm holding it by a handle. Then I'm
That's
not
true.
warming it with my hands,
that is true.
right?
Yeah, I
Think to
mean,
that.
maybe you're technically warming the handle, which somehow shifts the heat off of it into the glass.
No, it
but
doesn't.
I don't know.
The last thing I want to say on glass is I have never understood the concept of a frosted glass, and that is exclusively what my dad drinks beer out of. Exclusively, like he'll have a beer every night, has to be in a frosted glass. And here's the kicker: when he pours in his beer, it slushes at the top. He gets slush beer at the top. So he's getting like a thin layer of slush beer, then he's just got this super cold beer, and as we've established, probably can't get all the flavors out of it.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, and I've just never seen. And the beers are coming from the fridge too. Like they're already plenty cold. You don't have to like ice them over on top and surround them with ice to make them cold.
Yeah, I don't know who
I
started.
don't get it.
I don't know who started the frosted glass thing, but it's. I don't want to say infected, but it's infected the minds of a lot of people where they think it needs to be super cold, right? I mean,
Yeah.
my general
I
rule.
gotta ask him why he started doing that because I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear why he did that. And my general rule is, drink whatever beer you like, and you like whatever you like, and that is what it is. But I can't get on board with frosted glasses or slushy beers. I just can't.
Or slush beer. Have you tried a fully slush beer?
I mean, I'm sure
Like
I've,
something you would get at 7-Eleven, but instead of the Coke one, it's just
well,
it's a
I
frozen
think if
beer.
you remember mini fridge that I had in school, it did slush a lot of beers. So
But would we drink? There was one time it got too close to extra close to the thing, and it exploded. I remember that, but we didn't consume that after that happened.
well, but I
But
remember.
did you consume slush beers normally?
I
I feel
mean,
like I was just
I didn't
waited
normally.
for them to.
Yeah, I mean, I would normally wait for
Yeah.
it to just thaw out, but I mean, if it's something like Miller High Life or whatever, then I might drink it. But if it's something like our next beer, I probably wouldn't. I would wait for it to thaw out. So, do you want to introduce?
Is that our segue?
That was a segue. If you want to introduce our next beer, I'm gonna.
I want to introduce it.
Yeah.
I'm not quite done with my first beer.
I'm not
But
either.
I don't really want to drink this out of the can.
Oh, so you don't have?
Do you have a separate?
I do.
Do
Have,
you have a separate glass?
I do.
for it?
I do have separate glasses, but.
All right, let me just work on. I'm gonna work on this.
I'll introduce it then. You work on that. Yeah, I mean, I have this over here, this sitting. So the next one we're going to do is Gumball Head by Three Floyds. So I love this can. I mean, this is one of my favorite cans, right? I mean, it has, it's kind of hard to see because of my lighting here, but I don't even know what this thing is. Like, what is that on the front of this? I don't know.
It's like an angry looking cat thing. Is where I guess it could be a dog actually. Cat dog is the first illustration that comes to mind when I see this guy. It's like a cat dog, but I guess he'd be more like the cat than the dog if we're comparing it to cat dog.
That's true.
He's got pointy ears, is I guess my my main takeaway. Pointy ears and a big pink nose. But I agree with you. I love the can.
Yeah, the can's
very
great.
colorful.
I mean, it draws your attention. This brewery is one that's kind of, I don't know, well known, at least where I'm from, maybe where you are as well. But it's from Munster,
it's
Indiana. So if you thought nothing good ever happened in Indiana, here's your proof that you're wrong. It's not normal.
Who said that? Who are you calling out with
I'm
that
not. I'm
comment?
not calling anyone out. I'm just.
Okay, I don't know. I didn't know people said that.
People say a lot of stuff, Daniel.
Jay Cutler's from Indiana.
He
It's a
is
perfect example.
from
It's a
from Santa Claus, actually.
Santa Claus.
And just to answer one of the questions here, so we have Celsius or Kelvin degrees. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if you have a beer that is being measured in Kelvin, then it's already exploded out of the can. I mean, I guess you could measure it in Kelvin if it's not exploded, but I would think that at such cold temperatures that you would normally use Kelvin at, well,
Those are also both wrong. We were talking about Fahrenheit.
we were talking
believe.
about Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Yes, we were talking about Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this one. Can you tell what this glass is? I'm not gonna tell you what it is. Hopefully you can't see the writing, but
Oh, that's a log glass.
that is a log glass. Yes. So we have the
Wow.
Lagunitas dog there.
Yeah. What an iconic logo.
It is. I mean, I love that logo. I mean, I think the logo is just unrivaled. I mean, who else has a logo that you can think of just right off the top of your head right now? That's a beer company.
Yeah, like
I
any
mean, well,
brewer-
yeah,
I
like
don't
I don't
know.
know. I don't. Yeah.
I mean, I do think that is a beer that both of us know very well, and for good reason. They only make good beer.
That's true.
So-
And I'll mention I'm pouring this the same way that I was pouring the other one, kind of tilted glass. And as I get closer here, we're gonna turn it up. We do have.
I guess Space Dust and Voodoo Ranger are both pretty iconic. But those are
But those are brands of actual
in our
beer.
chat. Those are specific beers. We're talking about just like the overall. I mean, New Belgium, I guess, with their bike logo is pretty iconic, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't come to mind immediately. So.
Right. Yeah. It's hard because when you think about
Yeah.
all these beer companies, you think a lot of the brand of beer, right? It's not
Right.
usually brewery. Like it's not usually at the brewery level, right? You're thinking of the
Yeah.
brands of beer that you like, and other than that, you don't really care. I think Lagunitas is a special brewery, at least to us, just because they have so many cool things that are seasonal. They have a lot of good stuff that's all year round. Now, while you're pouring this, I will make a comment that since you're using the same glass, if you had maybe a very dark beer in there before this,
Oh,
you would
my head's not great.
you would potentially mix the flavors. Yeah, I mean my head was not tremendous either on here.
Okay, this is an acceptable head actually. This is like maybe just over an inch, or some would say it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean
I like it a
I
little
think
smaller.
I think it's probably a little large for the style of beer.
Yeah.
But
Right. Yeah. What is that about? Like darker beers tend to have bigger heads, right? Or they tend to be served with bigger heads.
I
Is
mean,
that right?
I think it really depends on the brewery who makes it, if it has CO2 or nitrogen, if it is a certain style or not. I mean, a lot of
Like a Guinness. A Guinness, I feel like has a pretty hefty head.
yeah,
Or it
I mean,
should.
a Guinness, yeah, but Guinness is also served, I think, partial nitrogen always, and they have a very specific way that you're supposed to pour it. I don't know exactly what it is.
Right.
I mean, you can look it up, but there's a way that you're
Yeah.
supposed to pour it that is not exactly normal. It's not just you just push the thing and there you go. It's
Mhm.
using some technique and some potential different system than other beers, but yeah, depending on the
Is that
style.
part of the Cicerone test, do you think? Knowing how to pour a Guinness?
A Guinness specifically, no, but I mean, how to pour a beer, yes. How to set up a tap line, yes. That's one thing I didn't mention earlier. Is there's a lot of math actually in all the tubing and like the
Yeah.
pressures that you need, and I mean that's one part that I'm really lacking on. So I'm not a
I had this conversation with one of my roommates recently, and we were talking about like in my dream house or mansion, I think it'd be awesome to have beer on tap. But what would that take to like maintain that regularly? Like how often would I have to switch out the barrels or clean the taps, or like would it have like a self-cleaning thing? Like what does it take to actually install and then upkeep
well.
taps?
I
in your
think
house
if you have something
or in a bar, I guess.
right? Well, in a bar setting, I don't know. It's a lot more commercialized, and
Sure.
there are special things for bars that they can buy that make things easier. But in your house, though, I mean, there are smaller kegs. Like, you know, you could get a half, a sixth, whatever, instead of like a full-on keg, so it would fit more easily. There are certain systems where you just put the keg down, you plug it up. It has a CO2 canister also, and you're able to just pour it straight from there. If you wanted it like built in, maybe sort of like a bar might do it, you would probably need a room
Yeah.
with refrigeration that refrigerates the kegs. You would need some CO2 hookups. You would need to clean them. Usually 2 weeks is the maximum you want to go. So a lot of
2
bars,
weeks per clean
yeah. So like
maximum.
you would want to dismantle the mechanism that serves the beer and clean it out at least every 2 weeks. I mean, I know a lot of beer companies, when they send their reps around to the different bars, they'll have them clean it. So I mean, some companies I think specialize in stuff like that. I mean, among other things, but they come in and
makes
clean
sense,
all of
yeah.
them. But yeah, one of the problems is if you don't clean it. I mean, imagine you have beer that just dries, right? And then you use it
Yeah, that's
again,
not good.
and then it dries over it again, and you know maybe you had some bacteria get in there. It's just, yeah, it can cause a lot of things to get people sick. I mean, if it's in your house, obviously less likely to get people sick, but if it's in a restaurant and bar, if you don't clean it every 2 weeks, it's not guaranteed it will, but you know, to stay up to health standards, you definitely want to do it every 2 weeks.
How long would a keg stay good for if you're keeping it refrigerated?
I mean, I don't know exactly. I would estimate probably the same as anything else. I mean, if you
Really? Okay, so it's like it would be the same thing, like your 6-month rule would also apply to
I would think so
beer in a keg.
because your keg is metal, right? And the only exits
Mhm.
to this metal container are going to be the tap lines, right? I mean, there are some other things that you could open, but in just general usage, it's just going to be like the tap line stuff, your CO2 stuff. So you're not like exposing it to the general air every single day. You're not allowing sunlight in. You're not doing any of that. So I mean, I would imagine as long as it's refrigerated, it'll stay.
Yeah. And if you didn't have it refrigerated, how would that affect the timeline?
So if you didn't have it refrigerated, I think, at least for me, it would speed it up tremendously because heat is one of the things that does make beer start to go bad.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it would cut it in half or not, maybe even more. But if it's not refrigerated, then it's probably not going to stay as good for as long for sure. But if you're just gonna use, you know, as long as you don't have a full keg, if you're just gonna use it for yourself, maybe if you have a sixth of a keg or something, you'll drink it a lot faster. Or they even
Right,
have
I would
smaller things than that. You know, there are things like all like pitcher size, like 4 beers maybe, or you might be able to get them a little
really?
bit bigger. I
You
mean,
can buy like that's just a growler, right?
yeah, I
At that
mean,
point?
yeah, you can buy stuff like that. If you look in some of the stores, you might see small keg-like things that you could hook up to a contraption that they sell, obviously.
Yeah.
That are just like easy install. So
Right. Okay. All right, I'll keep the option open.
yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting for sure, but I don't know. I'll
You
stick.
wouldn't want a tap system in your house?
I mean,
In your
it.
dream house? Why not though? Like you've got all this money, you don't know what to do with it all. You've become a country music star. You're loaded. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, in the dream house, I guess. Yeah, I would say.
yeah, why not? That's what, yeah. It doesn't have to be a realistic goal, but if you just have more money than you know what to do with,
But yeah, at that
I
point,
don't know.
I
I think it'd be
guess
fun.
as long as I don't have to clean it myself, and at that point, I would just hire
Right. Well,
someone to
you
do
hire
it.
someone. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
what are your thoughts on this one?
Hoppy is the first thing I
Hmm.
get. So when my instinct is hoppy, then like to the flavor wheel, I go to the hops quadrant.
Yep.
Is that right? And then uh okay, so bitterness is like its own category, and then you have all these different aromas and flavors that fill out the rest of it, and that's what it's categorizing by region of the earth, it looks like. Like it's got its bitterness section, which
Right.
has
Yep.
5 things, yeah, and then the rest of it's like more specific.
Right.
Okay, so in the bitterness category, let me try it again. Iffy, I don't know what that taste is or how I would describe that.
I'm actually not sure either. So, and
Earthy, peppery,
if there are other
botanic.
flavors that you get that aren't on here, then I mean, you definitely can mention them.
Right. Maybe there's probably some dryness to it, is what I would say.
I definitely get that.
I mean, I feel like with all like beers like this, I always feel like there's some floral and fruity element to them.
Yeah, this one kind of underneath. There's kind of a lemon.
Yeah.
It's
There's some fruitiness, but I haven't nailed it down yet.
I think lemon is what it should be tasting like. I know this beer is dry hopped, and I think the hops.
It is dry hopped.
I think the hops that they use are from the Yakima Valley, is what I read.
And yeah, it describes itself as refreshing with a lemony finish. So
there you have it. Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely like on the finish, like when you first taste it, you get a bitterness up front. I think that's kind of the standout thing. You can taste the bitterness, and then on the finish, it definitely kind of morphs into a fruity beer. But the difference, I think, between this and like, this isn't an IPA. This is just an American Pale, right?
Pretty sure. I believe so. Or is it a? Yeah, it's a wheat pale ale.
American wheat pale.
So, yeah. So what is that versus an American pale ale?
I think specifically they use wheat as their main.
But I guess like what does that do to the flavor? Like, do you feel like there's some wheatiness to the flavor?
To me, I feel like it lightens it somewhat. You know, if you think about like, I think Blue Moon also is kind of a weedy.
That's not a pale. Is that a pale?
I think.
I don't know.
I think it's pale ale.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think it makes it a little bit lighter. I think the weediness of it makes it kind of light. The hops overhead kind of balance that with being pretty. They're pretty intense for a normal pale ale, and so a lot of people, I don't know if they'd like this or not, because it does have like an IPA-esque kind of feel to it, even though it's not.
Yeah, and I guess you should have another episode on like IPAs versus APAs, but to me, like when I hear American Pale Ale, well, first of all, when I hear IPA, Indian Pale Ale, like I know that that's going to be very hop forward. Like I kind of know what it's going to taste like before I try it. With an American Pale Ale, I almost feel like the same thing versus just when I hear Pale Ale, then I'm like, oh, this probably isn't going to be too hoppy. So is it like all just sort of a hops categorization when they're talking about American Pale Ale versus Indian Pale Ale? Like, what are the big differences there?
It's not necessarily categorization based on hops. I mean, it's sometimes the style is how it's brewed. Sometimes it does indicate that there's going to be more hops. Like with an IPA, you're going to have hops in there. I mean, that is one main ingredient because hops are what were used back whenever but like the English were shipping their ales to India, right? And so it kept it longer. I mean, so it's just like a stylistic thing that's how it was. And so now that we're recreating these styles, because IPAs really just came back within the past 20, 30 years. I mean, they were kind of out of
that new, really?
I mean, they're not that new, but the fact that they're so popular, I mean, they have.
I guess I knew they recently became very trendy and popular.
Right. Yeah, I mean, now every brewery is doing an IPA. So.
Oh yeah, you gotta.
If you don't have an IPA, then what are you doing, right? It's
not doing things right.
Well, that's debatable, but yeah, it's jumping
Well,
on it's jumping on the bandwagon, I guess, at this point. But
yeah, they're gonna sell. People like them. But like, what I mean, do you know the differences between, like, I guess, because to me IPA, like, obviously it is reflective of the way they used to do it back then, but it is, like you said, very hop heavy or hop forward. Is American Pale Ale that same, like, would you use that same description to describe how they brew American Pale Ales? Or like, what is the
well,
difference there?
so let me do this. Let me go and get the actual style guidelines for an IPA and the style guidelines for a pale ale. So there is and this could be an episode in and of itself, but there is a
Yeah.
beer judging program that do a lot of the judgings for all the competitions. They have certified judges who are able to taste all of these different things. They're very experienced in that. They have forms that you can fill out as the judge that you write down, like, oh well, this is a little bit off. It tastes like this. It had this thing on the mouthfeel. It had this, whatever. Right? You can go look up the forms and all the stuff about it, the certification program and all that. But they have basically a guide, and it's all categorized into different styles. And for your India Pale Ale, so an American IPA, their overall description of it is a decidedly hoppy and bitter, moderately strong American Pale Ale, right? So
Okay.
it's a
Yeah.
pale ale that is generally hoppier, more hop character, flavor, aroma. But I think
Right.
in its structure, I think it's
That's what I would use for. That's what I would call an IPA too.
right. I think
I
in
would
its
describe that the
structure,
same
it's
way.
the same, other than that classification for the hops. But IPAs in general may not be exactly the same, if that makes sense, right? Like an American IPA, like today's IPAs and what we think about them, it does indicate that there is that hoppiness to it. But
Hmm.
IPAs in general just have hops, but not necessarily in the same kind of vein as how we do it in America and at all the breweries who are doing the hoppy. We got to
Mm.
have our own
Like,
IPA.
do we overdo it in America? We make it
I mean,
more hoppy than it needs
I
to
don't
be.
think it's overdone. I mean, I like IPAs, so
Okay.
I think it's good. I mean, some
I
people
I like
think
them
it
too.
tastes like metal. I mean, they get a metallic kind of flavor, and they don't like the
Yeah.
bitterness.
Eh, it's not for everyone. We
Which
haven't really talked about mouthfeel. Um, have you thought much of mouthfeel? Obviously, like, the darker beers like Guinness we talked about before, I think of as creamy. I feel like those are all in the creamy mouthfeel
which
category. But
probably
these all feel like, the opposite end of the spectrum, right? As far as beer goes.
yeah, for me, like when I'm drinking this Gumball Head, right, I don't think it's not super like thick or anything. It's not creamy, but I think it's
Yeah.
kind of a medium mouthfeel to it. It's sort of
It's
sharp.
decently smooth. Oh, I
I,
would say it's decently smooth.
well, no, I mean it's smooth drinking, I think, but you can
Hmm.
taste the alcohol on it, right? And the
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
bit
it's got
and
that bite to it.
right.
I guess I call things like this having a bite to them, and
Hmm.
I don't think that's a technical term. I think it makes sense to me.
Yeah,
But
well,
maybe that's a description of mouthfeel that I've created, having a bite.
I think, I mean, I understand what you're saying whenever you say it
You
as
get
a
it.
bite. So,
Okay,
I mean,
good.
it's fair to say, I think, in that way.
All right, I'm gonna keep doing it.
I mean, looking at the flavor
Fizzy
wheel,
for sure. It's
yeah,
got fizzy.
it's definitely kind of fizzy. Although there are some beers that are very, very fizzy. I
Sure.
mean, I do see some bubbles going up, but there are certain styles where it's just going crazy. Kind of like the background of the show here. I mean, we have that.
Which, by the way, I love that you introduced me as the lead designer or whatever, but I cannot take credit for the background, and I should have looked up our guy's name before we came on here, but that was just a free video we found on YouTube, and the guy in the comments replying to someone else said, like, yeah, everyone can use this for whatever, which we were very appreciative of because it is completely on brand of what we were trying to do here.
It was. I mean,
So.
it was.
I wish I had his name. I don't think you
Yeah,
know it either.
I don't
but-
have his name either, but I don't know. Maybe
But
we can...
he wasn't in it for the recognition. You know, he was just like, let me give this great
Right.
thing to the world. I'm glad we're putting it to use.
Yes.
And he would be too.
I think so.
Yeah.
One thing, because I know we've been running for a while here, that I thought might be good to get to is just some history that I thought was kind of interesting about ales. You know, so we talk about the lagers and the ales, and those are two categories. So like what we're having right now is the ale, right? And what we had before was a lager. And generally, the lagers are colder, served colder. We think about it like bottom fermenting yeast versus top fermenting yeast, even though that's not exactly true. Some of the breweries may have a certain strain of yeast that they've kind of trained to do certain things, right? So even though it might technically be a bottom fermenting yeast if you're making a lager, maybe their yeast strain doesn't exactly go as far down as most yeast strains, or vice versa for ales, which I think is kind of interesting. The history, I don't have too much to say on the lager side, but for ales specifically, what I thought was really interesting is that it hasn't always been so simple. Ales have had a comeback, I guess, the same kind of 20, 30 years that I was talking about with IPAs. People started calling things ales a lot more rather than just beer, right? At some point, beer was just beer, and that's everyone knew it was beer, and no one cared to differentiate. It was just kind of all the same thing. And a lot of places have some interesting laws on it, and I think one of the most interesting, which this is kind of crazy to me, but Texas until maybe 2012 or so, I want to say it's 2012. I might be wrong on the year, but they had a law where depending on the alcohol content, you could call it a beer or not. So I want to say, let me just make sure. I want to say it's, yeah, so a beer is anything that was less than 4% alcohol by weight. And then an ale was anything that was more than 4% alcohol by weight. Right? Which...
What? But why is that distinction important?
I mean, to me...
The drinking age is for alcohol in general. Like, that didn't affect whether or not people could legally drink, right?
Correct. Yeah, it didn't affect that. It just affected marketing and labeling, right? So
okay.
If you sent your normal 5% American lager into Texas, you had to call it an ale if you're going to call it anything. You could
see. So they just like made up their own definition for ale versus lager? Is that basically what they did?
Yeah, and that's what it's been a lot across the world. I mean, places they have different...
It's just defined based on alcohol content.
Well, not necessarily everywhere, but like in Texas, that's how they did it, right? But
yeah.
For example, in England, they didn't define it the same way. I want to say in England, whenever they were defining like beers and ales, like ale was a specific thing, right? It's like that is an ale, and this is a beer. And over time, the definition has morphed a lot, and people understand it differently. And I think at this point in time, most people are kind of on board with the lager ale categorization, even though it's not exactly true. It's not so clean cut, but I like it for simplification, right? It's like, okay, if it's a lager, I know it's going to be a little served cooler. I know the yeast is going to be on the bottom. I can expect probably fewer flavors to show through, whereas an ale, I might expect, maybe some banana esters from the yeast, or I might expect it's going to be a little bit warmer when it's served. It might be, it has some characteristics that are just different. It helps you think about what you're getting, I guess.
What does that mean for the yeast to be on the bottom versus on the top?
I mean, it's just how the yeast is generally. Like, it's just like...
But what does that mean?
It's like physically on the bottom. Like, so whenever you're brewing
on the bottom of
the container,
of the thing you're drinking.
No. So it's on the bottom of the container that you're fermenting the beer in. So
the wort, when it's eating the wort, it's on the bottom. Is that what you're saying?
So yeah. So whenever it's fermenting, right? So whatever container it's in, whether it's like a I don't know, like a glass container that you bought to homebrew, or it's one of the huge metal things that breweries
Right.
have. The
And
yeast,
fermenting is the yeast eating and then pooping. That's what fermenting is.
it's the
Pooping
yeast,
alcohol.
it's the yeast
Sorry.
eating the sugar and
Eating sugar,
producing the
pooping
byproducts
alcohol. Yes.
of alcohol and carbon dioxide. Yeah.
Yeah, you can say pooping. I don't
Well, I mean, I
think
don't
it's
think that's
fine.
technically what it is, though. I mean, that's
Well, they're little things swimming around eating and then excreting. So continue.
yeah. It's not how I
So
would
why
describe it.
why what makes them go to the bottom or the top, or is that something the brewers choose?
Well, I just at a high level, the yeast is gonna do whatever it does because of its species, right? Like they just have an innate thing that they do, right? But
Mm.
some yeast strains that breweries have, they've had for hundreds of years, actually, right? So whenever they use their yeast, it creates more of itself, right? They put it in there and it starts producing more yeast buds, and they'll take it, and over time it can change somewhat. Um, there's a lot of yeast that you can get at the store that might be the same yeast that a brewer uses, but because that brewer has brewed thousands of batches of beer, it's changed a little bit because it's a living organism, right? So your yeast is not just some thing that sits in the beer and you don't have to worry about what it's doing, but it's something that they're very conscious of, and the flavors that it produces whenever it does the fermentation. And depending on how warm it is, how cool it is, it can make the yeast do different things, like produce certain flavors, which can be considered off flavors if it's in the wrong style. So,
Interesting. Is there an example of that? Like
yeah,
giving the wrong flavor in the wrong style?
I mean, if you have like a banana flavor in this pale ale, for example, that's not correct. That's an off flavor. But if you have the banana flavor and a hefeweizen, then that's how it's supposed to be.
We
You
should
know?
do a Hefeweizen episode. I would
Yeah,
like to.
yeah. I mean, there are a lot of ideas, I think, and anyone who's watching can suggest things. I mean, I'm always open to different shows. I mean, I think there's a lot to say about German beers, and yeah, Hefeweizens are very
Hmm.
interesting. So,
Yeah.
one thing that I did want to bring up, which I thought was interesting. So I mentioned the English earlier in their categorization of ales, but did you know? I didn't know this before. I did a little bit of research before this, but it was introduced to the English by the Danes,
Did not
and
know that.
yeah,
No.
and they called it like Ool, I think is how you pronounce it. Uh,
Okay.
it's OL, but it has the what is it, the umlaut over the O,
Hmm.
and the drinks that they had um, in England at the time, they were known as ales. The stuff from the Danes, they were known as ales. But then, whenever brewers started to use hops, they knew that as beer, right? So that was their differentiation,
They had two categories: beer, ales, and then beer.
right? Well, same thing with Texas, except they didn't define it the same way, right? And
Right.
so the English drinks that were ales, it was just water, malt, yeast. But then the beers could have other things.
No
And
hops.
right,
No hops in the ales.
right. So the ales were just what they were, right? And they didn't want any changing. There's actually very strict law about advertising your stuff a certain way, so you could be fined a ton of money back then. Um, in England, if you were calling it one thing but it was really the other, and so that was their kind of differentiation between ales and beers, which I thought was interesting. It's just one of those things where now, when I think about it, like I said, it's just the two kind of categories, but it just kind of tells me what to expect. Whereas in the past, it's been
Yeah.
like a very hard defined line, like this is and this is not, right?
Right. Yeah, it is interesting. So you're saying um the ales back then were like the more simple flavors basically, and then beer had more going on than ales.
I mean, in terms of maybe hop character, because there were no hops, but you could still get a
Right.
lot of flavors from the yeast itself, right? But yeah, I mean,
Sure,
they were
sure.
probably a lot cleaner. I think that all the ales would probably have followed the Reinheitsgebot, which is the German.
What?
So that's the German purity law, right? That says that you can only have like water, your grains, your yeast. There are actually two purity laws. Like one is the German one, but then there's another like I don't know if it's specific to one of the I don't know if they're states, provinces, well whatever they are in Germany. But I think they have potentially have additional ones that aren't like the German overarching one. But yeah, I mean basically it would just follow that law where you didn't have any adjunct, any like now some beers put like rice in there or honey or whatever. Like you can't have that and follow the German purity law. So I think the
Got it.
old English ales would follow that law, even though they weren't in Germany. But I just thought it was kind of interesting. They sort
So
of
are
followed.
hops aren't like a given or essential in any way to beers? Like do the popular beers now, or are there any that don't use hops at all?
I don't know if any don't use hops. I mean, I think it's very standard at this point to use some sort of hop in there, whether
Hmm.
it's because they do a lot more than just bitter it, right? I mean, they can be for the
Right.
aroma.
There's a lot of cool flavors that come out of hops,
Yeah,
right? Like there's a bunch of different types.
there's I want to say there's like 100 different types of hops, and maybe that's an episode we could get into is
Yeah,
um,
that'd be cool.
the kind of hop varieties that there are. But depending on when you put it into the boil, because a lot of them are put in the boil, or you can do it at other times too, dry hopping. But uh, if you put it in early versus late, it can change how much of the acids get pulled out of the hops. So it's going to affect the bitterness more, or it's going to affect the aroma more, things like that.
Got it. And so like even the darkest, maltiest beers still have some hops in them. Is that
Yeah,
right?
usually, yeah. I mean, but they're not hops that are going to have a fruity flavor, probably, and they're not hops that are going to affect the taste that they're trying to go for. But they might actually bitter
Yeah, so
it.
like why are they there?
Well,
Just
a lot of times it's for bittering.
a hint of bitterness. Yeah, because like I don't even think of those beers as bitter necessarily, but maybe it's just sort of like
Well, I think you don't
I guess
taste the bitterness from the
right,
hops as much as you do, like maybe the coffee flavor or the
right,
chocolatey
right.
flavor. I think the flavor is just so powerful that it kind of
Hmm.
overtakes everything.
Yeah, that's fair. Makes sense.
So I know I said earlier that I was gonna talk about
Get into Untapped.
Untapped. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, go be a sale. Let's get our second sponsor. We already got Miller for the podcast earlier.
so I've had Gumball Head before, right? So I've checked it in, but Untapped. I keep track of everything on Untapped. I know you don't use it and you don't believe in it for whatever reason,
Tell our
but
viewers what it is
yeah, I
first.
mean, first it's an app. Um, you can get it in the App Store, probably Google Play or whatever. But basically, it's sort of a social media for beer drinking. Um, I use it to keep track of everything that I drink. That way, I know if I've had a new beer or not. I don't drink the same thing twice if I don't want to, have the old stuff. I mean, you definitely can. I mean, I do check in some of the same beers more than once, but I mainly use it for when I go to like a beer festival or something like that, or I'm doing a tasting of 4 to 6 of them. It's just hard to remember what I've had. Um, so that's what I use it for. I also connect with a lot of friends who use it. Probably have 10 to 12
Yeah,
people I keep track of on there. So,
yeah.
it,
Not this one, but
yeah, not you.
that's
Maybe
okay.
maybe one day you'll hop on the
At this
Untapped
point,
train.
I don't think so. I don't know. I've always just felt like if I try a beer and it's memorable enough to me, then I'm gonna remember it. Like I'm gonna know if I've had a beer, if it was worth remembering that I had it. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense, except it wouldn't work for like
What do you
going to
mean?
a
It
like
works. It works great.
Great American Beer Festival. I mean, it's not gonna work.
Well, but for that, there's no way I would remember every single beer I had, unless one was, of course, super amazing. But I don't think that would like I just don't think that would influence my decision to get a certain beer or not get a certain beer if I had to like go back and check what I thought of the beer. You know what I mean? Like I think any beer that I would want to buy, I would know if I want to buy that because I'd remember trying it and
In
it would be
store for
amazing.
sure, I agree. But like if I'm out and about, it's like, oh well, that sounds interesting. Have I had that? Oh, I have. I gave it a 2.5. Well, maybe I don't want to get it on tap. You know.
Okay.
I also just really
Mm.
like trying new beers. It's a
Yeah. You've also probably tried far more beers than I have. How many have you checked in at this point?
I've checked in 1,706 unique. So
Does it tell you like how many different breweries those are from?
I could figure it out. Yeah, you can categorize it like by style, by brewery, when you had them, the stars you gave. Yeah, I mean they have a bunch
How
of.
many different like distinct styles are there, or at least on Untapped? Like, does it have
Um,
categories?
yeah, I mean there's a ton of styles. Let me just try and filter it. So for me, this is only the styles I've tried, but it
Hmm.
tells how many of each style that I've had,
Yeah.
and you know
Wow.
if I'm looking through here,
Yeah.
right,
It's a
it's
long scroll.
yeah, it's a ton, but they differentiate pretty precisely, like wheat beer,
Yeah.
American
Okay.
Pale, wheat beer, Dunkelweizen, wheat beer, Hefeweizen, wheat beer, Hefeweizen Light, wheat
Oh,
beer
these are all
other.
like under the wheat beer category, sort of.
Yeah, so it's very specific categories, which
Yeah.
they're more or less the same, but
Right.
technically different.
Oh, but it's good to, I guess, with an app like that, it's good to specify as much as possible.
Yeah, so on a scale of 0 to 5, which is what Untapped uses, and if you're a normal Untapped user, you can do it in 0.25 increments. If you're a supporter of Untapped, they let you do zero point 0.1 increments, so you can get a little bit more precise.
Really?
Yeah, um,
Okay. Do you do point one? Or are you not a supporter?
I'm a zero point 0.1 guy, so
You're a point one guy. Okay.
I love Untapped. I mean, I
I
want
know
to
you do. Yeah, I get
I
it.
want to support them. They're great.
Yeah. It is a cool idea for an app. I have nothing against them. I also feel like there was some element of like because I didn't start it right when I started drinking beer, it just feels like a lot of, in hindsight work that I would have to do to make it a good
I
app
mean,
for me.
you could just hit the ground running, and just say I'm
I don't think
starting
it's that
now, and
easy. No, but then I'm gonna try everything again, and yeah, don't need to do that. Anyway, were you asking me what my
yeah.
rating would be of this beer?
What's your rating? It's
Oh well, let's go in order. Let's do the high life first, although I don't have it fresh on the taste buds. But
okay.
realistically, it's hard because I don't have like a baseline system to sort of reference. Like I've never rated a beer from 0 to 5, so I don't have anything to go off of to compare. I'm
I will
sure it's
say
helpful to see like, you know, a similar beer, how you rated that versus the one you're about to rate,
right.
right?
Yeah, and it's kind of whatever you want your system to be, right? Like some people
Right.
have
Some are heavily inflated, I'm
well,
sure.
some are heavily inflated, but some people do. Oh well, this is my favorite beer, like Natty Light, for example. That's a 5.
Sure, sure.
My scale
No, I'm gonna,
does not have any of
yeah,
that. My
I'm not
average is a
gonna do that.
3.6. So I mean, I do tend to rate based on how much I like it, but also how good I think it is generally. So I think there are two different ways you can come to a rating, and one is okay, this is an American pale. How good is it on that scale of American pales? And also, how much do I just like it, right? I do some
Yeah,
combination of the two. I don't know what
right.
the
Well,
right answer is, but
I'm gonna go based on how much. Well, no, I actually think you're right. I think your instinct to sort of balance it between how much you like it versus how good of a beer it is. Well, it's because like High Life, I like it a lot in comparison to the other beers of that similar category.
right.
But compared to the second beer we tried, for example, they're just so different. All right, I just gotta come up with a number. Um, High Life, I'm gonna give. Are you allowing me to do 0.1
Yeah.
increments, or I have to go
Yeah,
to 0.25?
you're an honorary supporter right now.
Okay, so honorary supporters get the 0.1 increments. I'll give High Life like a 3.2. I'm gonna give it a 3.2.
3.2. Okay.
I'm curious what you gave it. Are you below 3 on High Life?
I am below 3 on High
Suspect
Life.
you are. Okay.
I will say, based on my prior ratings, and I think I'm going to stick with my prior ratings. So I've checked it in once before. Right. I mean, I've had it more than that, but High Life is the highest rated American lager I think that I have. That like from one of the what you call macro breweries.
Yeah. What's the lowest? Or what's the rating of the lowest? Then you can tell us later which one it is. Just so I know your like rating range.
I'm not sure, but generally, like a lot of the American Lights, I'm rating like 1.5 to 2. Right, just because they don't interest me.
Yeah.
I mean, they're fine, but it's not what I want to drink.
They're fine.
And so that's when it comes in of how much I like it. Whereas, for what it is, it's good, right? I mean, if you want that,
yeah,
it is what it is. Yeah. So my rating on High Life. You can go ahead.
I think like the for what it is factored into my rating, right? Like it's and again, I have no prior scale to base it off of, but that's what maybe boosted it above a 3 for me. Is like for the alternatives you would get for what this is much better.
And that factors into this rating a lot too. I mean, otherwise it would probably be lower, but I gave it a 2.5. You know, so it's right there in the middle of the road. I mean, I think it is very good for what it is. It's not what I'm gonna choose to drink if I'm just out somewhere. I'm gonna get something a little more in the craft vein, but I mean, I think it is very solid. I mean, I understand why it's your go-to.
Sure, and I guess if I was on Untapped and I was like trying way more craft beers, I'm sure I'd have certain craft beers that were like around 3.2, and like I'm sure like you just can't really compare, you know, a High Life type beer to a decent craft beer.
Yeah, and I think 2.5 is my like mental maximum for that kind of beer, you know.
That's fair. Well, I'm sure Miller is honored, and I'm honored that you would rate it your highest domestic. So
yeah. So what do you think? What do you think about Gumball Head?
It's a 4. I give it a solid 4. Yeah, not my absolute favorite by any means, but it's a very good, solid beer.
So I've checked it in once before. I am actually on average higher rated than the 3 friends that I have who've also checked it in.
Okay.
Their rating on average is 3.5.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me, no, 3.8.
Ah.
Yeah, I lied. Right. So it's 3.8.
That sounds right. Yeah, I would be on board with that.
But the range is from 4.25 to 3.5. Mine, I rated a 4.2. So.
Okay.
I think it's a very high quality beer. I think the hoppiness of it is great. The lemony kind of undertones in it is really refreshing, and I mean it's all around good beer. I mean
it is.
Is it the best pale? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it is. Who knows? But it's something that I would definitely buy again, and I would definitely recommend people to at least try. So.
Yeah, it's very very drinkable too. Like despite the hop heaviness, like I don't know, it's smooth, and I agree. I like that lemony finish it's got going for it. But you know, marginally better than High Life, but not significantly. Like you have it rated 1.7 higher than High Life. That seems a little extreme.
Well,
for my scale,
I guess. I mean, it's. I mean, whatever your scale is what it is. I mean, I'm not gonna say you can't have it better.
We've created it live on the air, so this is my first attempt at rating beers from 0 to 5.
Now, I'm gonna respond here to one of the comments. So, you feel attacked by the Natty comment. Well, my rating.
What did he rate Natty? What did Robbie rate Natty?
It was a 5.
He gave it a 5. Okay, so you were directly referencing him. Okay.
I was directly referencing him.
Yeah.
He gives it a 5.
Yeah, know your audience.
Let's see, from 2016 to date. I mean, he's only checked it in 4 times, but he has checked it in as a 5 all 4 times. So it's consistent. I think he still maintains it's a 5. I mean, maybe he's changed his mind. I mean, look, I don't.
I'm sure he does.
Look, it can be a 5. That's fine, right? If you like
It's
it that much,
subjective.
yeah,
I think, and that is kind of the cool part of Untapped. Like it's what you make of it. You know, every app is going to be different to that specific person. It's their own
right
system. But it is also interesting, you know, what other people give it. Do you see Natty's average rating? Like,
yeah, so
app-wide?
Out of nearly 70,000 ratings, its average is.
Can I guess?
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna. Well, see, it's hard because like I don't know if people are gonna ironically give it 5s.
Now, do you want my rating before you? So my rating on this.
Yeah, give me your rating. Yeah.
I've rated it twice, and I went from. I've changed. So it used to be below a 1.
How do you change on this one?
Okay. It used to be below 1. I've since made it a 1. So
my gut was 0.5, by the way. Like that was just gonna be my instinct.
My standing rating is a 1.
Okay.
So
okay, and I have to guess the average. I do feel like there are a lot of people that would ironically give it a 5, or maybe genuinely give it a 5. I don't know. Some people probably religiously drink it, but are those people on Untapped? Probably not. All right, I'm gonna say because I think Untapped is probably more so craft beer drinkers. And not as many people that exclusively drink Natty. I'm going to give it like a 0.8 overall average.
And the average rating overall for 69,745 ratings is a 2.12.
2.12. People are way too generous on this app.
Now, I will say
that's so high.
The majority of the ratings come from the can, and get this, the average rating by can is 3.06.
Wait, what do you mean? Like when people are trying it out of a can specifically?
Yeah, so when it's served to them from the can, they give it a 3.06. When it's from a bottle, they've given it a 2.93. If it's draft, it's a 2.7.
I underestimated the amount of Natty purists out there, apparently.
Okay, the maximum though is from a cask, okay? And a cask, well, I don't even know if these are if these exist, right? But 40 people have said they've gotten Natty from a cask, and they rated it on average a 3.36.
Wow, that's higher than what I gave High Life.
The worst on here is a taster, and that's 2.16.
The taster of Natty is a pretty funny concept.
Although I don't know how it's a 2.16 while the overall is a 2.12. Doesn't really make sense to me, but
that doesn't make sense.
Well,
something's not adding up.
Well, I guess because the taster is 150 ratings rather than the 33,000 that a can has, but. Yeah, I don't know. If you get a taster of Natty, what are you doing? Do people do that? I don't think that doesn't make sense.
I feel like they shouldn't do it. I'm surprised that as many did as they have. Like whatever. None of those numbers mean anything to me. Like I know it's gonna be inflated by the Natty purists out there. Some people are just gonna do it ironically. I think my prediction of 0.08 or 0.8 maybe even. I think that's spot on. I think that's what it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I never really give anything. The reason I changed it to a 1 is because my mindset became
you changed your scale.
Yeah, I don't rate it less than a 1 unless it is actively bad, right? Like I actively do not want to drink it anymore, and
so maybe that's what people go by. Maybe they think of like average, like 2.5 as anything that or higher, they'll drink it. Maybe anything lower than that, they don't want it.
Right. Yeah, it could be. And, there's no way to tell. But, yeah, for me, if it's less than a 1, it's either, like, skunked, infected, something, or it's just horrible. I've only... Like the only thing that comes to mind that's been that bad is a beer that I had at a beer fest in Bangor, Maine. I'm not gonna mention who made it, but it was a beet beer, and it was not good. I gave it a point one. Um, my
Why not a zero? What would you give a zero to anything? What would it take for you to give a zero?
well, the only problem
Usually.
is I think it becomes unrated at that point if it's not point one. And I tried to,
Oh, okay.
yeah, just
You had to
leave
give it something.
Yeah, I think you might be able to do zeros at this point though. So
Okay.
I'm not sure if you can put a zero. I'm assuming you can,
Got it.
but
So you have basically given a zero.
yeah, I gave it the lowest
one
that I
beer?
possibly could. Yeah, it was a beet beer that was kind of reddish, and it was like
Sounds terrible.
a very cheesy flavor almost. It is just man, I'm telling you, it is.
I can't imagine what that flavor combo is. Beet and cheesy?
Well, it was cheesy just by virtue of it was bad, and the way that it was described. Okay, let me tell you the story real quick, and then I mean, maybe we can wrap it up because I know we're running a bit long. But
Did you ever tell your story to open the show? I don't think you
no,
did.
I never did. I can tell that too.
No, do it to close the show.
Okay.
It'll make more sense, I guess.
So the first story here about this beer is we were at a Bangor beer festival at like the convention center there or something, and we were going through trying beers, and you know me, I try my taster as well as whoever's there's taster before they even try it. That's how quick I am. I just want to try everything immediately. You know, it's like, all right, hurry up and give me your thing.
And you check in everything, even if
che-
you just have like one sip of it.
Correct.
It's checked.
I check it in as a taster. And mine, the thing that I got was fine. I don't remember what it was, but it was fine. The thing that my friend got was this beer, and I try it, and I look at him. I'm like, that is not good, right? And I give it back to him, and we walk to like the VIP section, and we go and sit down because they have like chairs in there or whatever. He sits down. He sits down and he tries his beer and like spits it into the trash beside him. He's like, "You did not tell me this thing tasted like sweaty feet, right?"
Oh, a good descriptor. Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, I told you it was not good." And he was like, "Okay, not good means like it's not a good beer. Like this is like the worst thing I've ever had." He didn't rate it. He just put it as unrated, and he's like, "I will never ever drink another beer from them again." Which, you know,
Wow, that's amazing.
I'd had beers from.
I bet they made some other good beers. Is my guess.
Well,
I bet not every beer they make is bad.
I've had an experience where I went to their brewery before, and I've also.
You haven't named the brewery, by the way. You're not gonna.
I have not. I don't want to flame them. Okay.
Yeah, we won't flame them. Yeah.
I mean, I can.
We've got big sponsors now. We're a big deal. Yeah, I get it.
So yeah, Robbie, this is Bangor Beer Festival, I think is the name of it. It's a small one, but yeah. So I'll tell you off air though if you want what the company is. But I'd been to their brewery before and sat in there, ordered food, looked at their map, and looked at how they brewed all their beers and stuff. It's a very small. It's like a nano brewery. I think the highest I gave was like a 3.25 maybe.
Oh, for any beer you
or
had
any
there?
beer that I had, yeah. And I think I've probably had. So I had a flight, so I probably had like 6. So I think.
But was it all like weird experimental stuff, or did they do anything normal?
Yeah, I mean, most of their stuff is normal, but it's just.
Okay.
At best, it's just average, right? I don't know.
It's not great. Yeah.
It was just one of those.
You'd rather drink a High Life almost.
Actually, yeah, probably.
Okay, well, you just said you rated theirs a 3.2 at most. So, do you want to revise your High Life rating?
I mean, no, I don't, because some of their beers are actually decent, you know.
Okay.
But a lot of them are just lackluster, right? They did a lot of stuff that I think was fine. I think it was, you know, beer, and I don't know how experienced their brewer is or if they had any experience prior. You know, I mean, it's not New York, Brooklyn. It's not Brooklyn Brewery, right? Where you have the brewmaster who is like the most knowledgeable person about, or one of the most knowledgeable people who talk about beer in general. Him or some of the master systems. Like, I don't think they had anyone who was really into it from the scientific or classroom side per se. I think it was more of just like a person who'd had some experience in it. It was like, oh, let's buy this and do
But
it.
it sounded like they were trying at least one weird thing,
Yeah,
right? Like, were most of their beers normal, and then like this was the one beer that you tried at the fest that was
yeah,
notably
they're
different?
mostly normal. I mean, I think they might have had some cool attempts at stuff, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't bet an eye about what they were doing, right? It's not like it's Extreme
Yeah.
Beer Fest style of beers. You know, you don't have a taco flavored beer where it legitimately tastes like you have the what is the brand of tacos? Like the Old El Paso, whatever it is, right?
There you go. Yeah.
You legitimately have the mild packet of flavoring, and that's the beer, right? Like,
I did you want that? What rating did you give that? I'm curious.
I don't remember. Robbie, if you're on here, so do you remember what that beer was? I can look it up, but
Like, you tasted it and you were like, they dumped a packet of
well,
this stuff in my glass?
well, they didn't actually dump a packet of it, but that's what it tasted like, right?
Yeah, yeah. I know
Um,
they didn't actually dump it. I would hope they didn't dump an actual packet, but hey, I love all the experimental beer that places try. I mean, even if it's bad, like, give them some credit for trying to push the product forward.
yeah, it's sorry, I was looking for stuff that had taco. So, yeah,
A weird shot?
I love Extreme Beer Fest, right? I love all the cool weird
Yeah,
things, and normally
it
I rate
sounds
them pretty
really
highly.
cool.
This thing is called Taco Goza. It's by Weldworks Brewing Company, and Weldworks, they're out of Colorado. Um, they have some beers that are very highly prized. I know at Great American Beer Fest there was a line that was it was the longest line in the building, right? And we were at the like special session for like brewers and stuff. And this one, it is a kettle soured wheat ale brewed over 600 pounds of fire roasted tomatoes, sea salt, chili powder, paprika, oregano, onion powder, garlic powder, and cumin, and tastes exactly how you'd expect if you had no idea
Yeah.
what to expect.
Those are taco ingredients for sure.
And I gave it. Guess what I gave it? I'll tell you.
I
Like I
don't.
said, I love extreme things. I love
Okay.
the Extreme Beer Fest.
You gave it like a 4.1. That's my guess.
So the average is a 3.47,
Okay.
and I gave it a 4.3.
4.3. Very good.
Yeah,
Taco beer. I
I
would like to try that.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's in production. I'm assuming it still is,
Yeah.
but it was really good. I thought. I don't know if yeah. It doesn't look like Robbie checked
Is
it
that
in.
safe to assume it still is? Like, are most things at that extreme beer festival, like, are they limited release only? Are they like intentionally sort of experimental, or do the breweries actually like roll this out
Some of them
as
I think are
legit beers?
legitimate beers, but I don't know
Yeah.
what the proportion of like just well, we tried this. Let's see how it does at the
Yeah,
Extreme Beer
there's probably
Fest.
like a good mix, I'd imagine.
I think I remember. I don't know if it was it might have been Great American where this was, but there was like
Mm.
varieties of Dragon's Milk that were pretty decent too. And they have like orange chocolate, some other
Yeah,
ones maybe.
that's fun.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I don't know anything else to say about Untapped or any other.
I
Question about
don't.
that?
I think you should take us all home with
Okay.
your what was
So
supposed to be your intro story. We got derailed pretty quickly, I think.
yeah, that's okay. So
Yeah.
I guess I'll preface the story with
There's a lot of hype about the story. About this was
man.
like you told me about it before the show, and you were like, I gotta intro this. This is this nuts thing that happened to me.
I mean, it's not even that crazy, other than the fact that
No, we're all
yeah,
on
okay. All right,
on the
all right.
edges of our seats. Yeah.
So let me preface this with, I don't know if this person is, under the influence of something, but they appeared to be. As I was driving home, okay, I was in the right lane, okay. It's 4 lanes that split out, right? But it comes from 3. So you have a far left lane that goes left. You have a lane in the middle that can go left or right. And then you have just the far right lane, right, that just goes right.
There are 4 lanes.
Hmm?
There are 3 lanes or 4 lanes?
Well, so it goes into 4, but like it's coming from fewer as you approach, right?
Got it.
So I'm in the lane that is the furthest right left turn lane. Okay, because there is no straight. You cannot go straight. It doesn't exist. I'm turning left, and I do what I always do because I come the same way all the time. And I'm turning left, and there's a white truck to the left of me, right? And this dude was driving kind of erratically anyway, but as I'm just nonchalantly going, driving through here, kind of tilting my wheel to the left because it's a slight left to go up to the light before you stop, this truck just literally starts coming over. It's like, I know I drive a small car, but legitimately, it was like this dude was in a semi and just couldn't see, but it was just a normal pickup truck. It was like a Dodge. I don't even know what the thing, like a 1500, like a Ram 1500, except an old version of it where it still said Dodge. And he just starts going right, and my mind was like, I have a show to do, and like
so this is like as you're turning left.
So I hadn't made it. Yeah, so it's before I made it to the light, right? The light was red.
Okay.
So I was slowing down. And I was gonna just kind of go to the light where I was gonna turn left, right? So
just in your lane.
Right. Yeah, I had not. Yeah. I didn't move lanes. I didn't have to turn. I didn't have to switch lanes. I've been in the same lane for like 2 miles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going forward on this, and this person starts coming over, and I'm like, do I stay in my lane? Like what do you do, right? And he just keeps coming, and I'm like, he's gonna see me, right?
You honk. Did you honk?
I laid on the horn, but as I did that, like I had to whip over. Like I had to evade. It was
really
it was evasive actions. Like I had to get into the lane and go right because he just did not stop.
Did you get like to look quickly to make sure you weren't about to drive into another car?
Well, luckily my lane can go either, right? So my lane can go left or right. It splits off. But yeah, I mean, I saw him coming into me, and like out of the corner of my eye, like there was nothing over there, and I know that my lane goes right. So I stayed in that right lane that veers off, but like my wheels had to screech. I was like,
jeez.
Like I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, is this person drunk? Like, never drink and drive, man. Like, there's no way you don't see me, right? We were driving next to each other for 3 different lights, right? It's ridiculous. And then this dude gets behind me, and I have to go a different route, right? So I have to go up and around and go back to get to where I was going. And
you got forced to turn right.
Yeah, because I got forced to turn right. Yeah. But like he goes to the light, and then he pulls up next to me, and I'm just like, man, this guy over here, like, how ridiculous is it that we can't even drive in a straight line anymore? Like, I know you wanted to get over, but you didn't have to run me off the road. Like, and so
that's scary.
Well, yeah. I mean, luckily, I guess whenever you go into a situation like that, you do have a little bit more time than you think sometimes, because it happened very quickly. But I do distinctly remember my mind going like, I really don't want to collide with this truck. You know?
No, that's a good, and it's a good mindset to have.
And I had to decide, like, okay, am I just gonna try and continue to go forward and hope he doesn't hit me, or am I gonna to whip the whip to the right? And no collisions happened, so we're all okay.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you're okay. That was probably just like a split second. You just had to make a move at some point.
Yeah, and I thought exactly this. I was like, man, maybe when I start the show, I should say, always drink responsibly, never drink and drive. Speaking of, I may have run into a drunk driver because he just almost ran over me. Like,
Yeah. Wow. But instead, we're ending the show.
instead, we're
that,
ending the show,
which is
with it.
still a good thing to end the show on, to not drink and drive after we've been drinking the whole time, and we're not about to go off.
We are not about to drive. I am gonna
So,
sit here in this chair for a little while longer, probably, and then go to bed. But I don't know.
Sounds great.
So what'd you think? Overall, did you enjoy the 2 beers? Did you enjoy the little chat?
Yeah,
Did you learn anything?
I had a great time. Oh, I learned a lot. I mean, I feel like I've been learning about beer for so long, but I so frequently forget like what the brewing process is actually like, what the differences are between different styles. So I'm excited for you to have like more devoted episodes and going into very specific differences in between styles. And I feel like that's such a big part of like becoming knowledgeable about beer, is just knowing what the difference is in the brewing process, knowing what the difference is in the flavor profiles. And so yeah, I definitely learned a lot. I thank you for having me on. This was
Yeah.
great. And two fantastic beers too.
2 very fantastic
say.
beers. I mean, if you're into their styles, you probably definitely like them. If you like hoppy stuff, you know, Gumball Head is tremendous. If you like just crisp, clean beers, High Life, probably can't get better, at least by my rating or yours. So, yeah, I appreciate you
Agreed.
being on. I appreciate all the help with the graphics. So, I mean, if anyone likes the graphics,
Of course.
definitely say hi to him. Again, you can find him on Twitter. I mean, he's a busy guy. He's doing a lot of, I don't know, ultimate stuff, right? So
A lot of ultimate stuff. Yes, we'll give a quick ultimate shout out to the AUDL, the American Ultimate Disc League, is what I do for my day job. I do marketing for them. So yeah,
Hey.
I'm often on Twitter. So
he's on Twitter doing all kinds of ultimate retweets of great plays, different stats, you know, that you think are interesting or whatever, that are just cool. I mean, there's so much stuff on there, and I think Ultimate's probably, you know, less. I don't even, like, it's less appreciated than even, you know, some of the more technical and specific things that I want to talk about in this podcast. You know, like, people don't know very much about beer, but I feel like people don't know much at all about Otto, and hopefully you're helping to boost the amount of people who take a look and watch. So
yeah, or if you want to hear more about the AUDL, I do have a podcast that I co-host with my coworker Adam called Swing Pass, and that is available on all podcast platforms. So yeah, I'm around.
Definitely take a look, check it out. I mean, he's very knowledgeable about it. I mean, love to hear him talk. I mean, if you liked what you heard here today, then that's more of it. Except it's not Otto.
I feel like it's a classic, you know, podcast guest comes on the show and has to plug their own stuff. So that's what this is.
That's true.
Swing Pass.
All right. Well, with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you guys learned stuff. If you have questions, thoughts, comments, do let me know. We're going to upload this to the Don't Worry Be Happy YouTube channel, which you'll probably be able to find once I actually post the video. On there, you'll see a lot of shorter things, too, I think. More in-depth topics about various things, like how to pour beer, how to do this or that, or maybe in-depth looks at the styles and guidelines, maybe just whatever. There's a lot of short stuff that I think we're lacking in the community of information, because there's a lot of long stuff where people just talk about this, that, and the other thing, but there's not a lot of specific targeted information out there. So if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. Again, thank you guys very much, and I hope you all have a good night or morning.
And beer happy.
Yeah, don't worry, beer happy.
There you go.